welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilborn, and the Dadley Boys of What Culture, Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick, here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts where we review Raw, SmackDown, the Wednesday Night War between AEW and NXT pay-per-views. We have interviews, more roundtable discussions like this one, and a roundup of the week complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on wrestle culture. As I said, I'm joined by Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick. And gents, we are gathered here today to talk about a very sensitive issue. It is a story that has kind of developed over the last week or so, ever since the announcement of all the WWE releases. I think everyone felt the most emotional reaction to Drake Maverick's announcement that he was being released by WWE and yet still taking part in the NXT Cruiserweight Championship tournament. And I don't want to just, chuck it out there of like, is this a work or is this a shoot? Because, people's careers, livelihoods, they're all on the line here. But you can't help but, watch like last night's episode, look at what's going on social media. And I've seen people tweeting me suggesting this and become slightly suspicious with how, let's say, more how WWE are handling this more than how Drake Maverick per se is handling this. Because I don't want to, point fingers at Drake himself, because I feel like he's kind of just been put in this situation. Do let us know your thoughts on this as we get into it in the comment section. We'll get some of your questions in due course. But Sidge, we were talking about this on the Wednesday Night War review podcast earlier. It's a tough subject to tackle, but it feels necessary.
It does. I found everything that I watched on last night's NXT broadcast about Drake Maverick just reprehensible is the word. It just felt so manipulative. I don't know the timeline. I don't have any sources within the company. I don't know explicitly what is going on, but it certainly feels to me, at the very least, like they've turned a shoot situation into a worked shoot. Everything about that match just resonated as quite ugly and manipulative to me, particularly given the fact that this man, I'm 99.9% sure of, was legitimately released and will in fact no longer work for WWE, or, given the ongoing crisis, anywhere after 90 or so days, or 80, or wherever we are at. He was adding a certain desperation oomph to every offensive move that he struck, as if it was his last chance and he was fighting harder than usual. The implication being, if I don't win, my life is over. And in actual fact, on some level, that's actually true. He got defeated. It was a killer move on the part of Jake Atlas, a wonderful looking offensive maneuver, but not one that was sold as a neck breaker or anything. And yet, in the post-match, when Jake Atlas was interviewed, he turned his head around and looked as Maverick was getting helped out of the ring in a scene that, for me, was just made to emphasize how pitiful this Drake Maverick character was meant to look. Jake Atlas, as he was getting walked out, just whispered almost, "Oh, I feel so bad." All of this indicated to me that the storyline was driven to get you, the viewer, to thinking, "Oh, I really feel sorry for Drake Maverick." And it's like, well, yes, I actually already feel sorry for Drake Maverick. Why are you manipulating this into a storyline? I find it disgusting. What do you think, Hamflett?
Well, Wilborn always says that we're gathered here today, and I don't really want to be gathered to talk about this. I know people enjoy it when me and Sidgwick have debates back and forth on the merit of something in NXT, but this is a situation entirely without merit. There is no debate here. What's the happiest ending that comes from the storyline is that Drake Maverick keeps his job. Let's say that they've decided to do a 180 on their original decision based on the power of that video, or just public outcry towards him, or whatever. How they ever go about booking this angle, let's say it ends up that Drake Maverick isn't sacked after all, not because he's won the interim cruiserweight title, just because a real life company has changed their real life minds about a real life job. Okay, so like, let's say he stays in work, then that hasn't gone without the crass manipulation of a very real life situation that is affecting people all over the world. Millions of people that watch WWE or watch wrestling and watch it, worst of all, for an escape from the things that they're currently experiencing. I personally haven't considered wrestling an escape for a couple of months now, not one bit, but plenty of people will. And yet they tune in and they're seeing some of the worst horrors that they're currently having to face in their real life manifest on screen. It's like I say, and that is the best case scenario. If this comes out that a man has managed to save a job that he had previously lost, then great. And yet they've still gone about this in the ugliest way imaginable.
Yeah, for me, what is the outcome of what has now clearly developed into a completely ugly worked shoot storyline? Does Drake Maverick now have to win? The answer to that question, realistically, is yes. Can you imagine if he loses now?
But the thing is, what you're suggesting there stays within the confines of a work, doesn't it? At this
Yeah.
point, like wins and losses are obviously just booking. So you're going to have people performatively saying, come on, Drake, you can do it. Drake, you can do it. We know. And anybody listening and watching this knows that that doesn't matter. Those wins and losses are not going to relate to whether or not this man gets his job back for real. And yet the WWE are kind of asking fans to dive in feet first with that reaction to these matches and that reaction to this angle.
The happy ending is not for me anywhere happy. Yay, getting Drake Maverick's got his job back. Who cares? Like, I mean, obviously, I would be quite happy for the guy. I'd rather he made a living and didn't at a time when we don't know when so many people out there are going to get the chance to make a living again. Obviously, I would like to see him have his job more than I would like to see him lose it. But ultimately, what kind of message does that send? How I rarely get offended. I've got a dark sense of humor. I'm numb to a lot of stuff. I'm 34 years old. I've seen it all. But this actually offends me. This genuinely, really offends me, this storyline, because I think the message is so bad and how it reflects on everybody else who had the temerity to lose their jobs and not work almost their way back into them. Like, is he? I don't know how the contract situation works out. You expect he's getting paid for his notice, or he's getting, if that isn't the case, then he is getting a supplementary wage for doing this regardless. But the idea is he is essentially on some level working for free, or working when he's not getting paid, or working when he's not got a guarantee of payment after the next 3 months. So the idea is now the precedent's being set like, oh, if you just work hard, even though you've got no guarantee of future income, you might get your job back. That is so goddamn awful, ludicrous, horrific precedent to set. And I feel guilty saying this because how complicit is Drake Maverick at all, if at all?
Yeah, it's a really tough subject matter for us to tackle here because I really don't want to point the finger at someone like Drake Maverick, who I think it's fair to say a lot of, if not all of us at What Culture are huge fans of. And you dissected it brilliantly on the podcast earlier as well, Sige, saying that there's effectively 3 ways this has happened. Eric Vasquez, in fact, pointed this out yesterday when we were doing the preview. So thanks to Eric for getting involved in the comments. I'll come to some of your comments I've seen already in the comment section in a second. Number one, they turn to Drake Maverick and say, we are going to release all these other people who you're no doubt close with. And
ET3?
Yeah, exactly. We're going to release all these people in this completely uncertain time for no real justification in terms of we haven't got any legitimate reasoning why to do it aside from saving a bit of money, which we don't really need to do. But we're going to pretend to release you so that we can work this into a, no offense to it, work this into a storyline involving the interim NXT Cruiserweight Championship tournament. Number 2, which I sense is quite possibly the most likely one, is they legitimately released him, saw all the backlash / public response and support for someone like Drake, and then decided, actually, we can really use this, which is terrible because that's saying, well, if Sarah Logan had released a heartbreaking video on Twitter, maybe she'd still have a job today. Maybe we would have brought her in for Raw this week. Or number 3, I mean, I can't decide which is worse, but number 3 is, no, you're still getting released, but we're really just going to, wring out, really milk the last of your employment with this company by emotionally manipulating you and the fans. Undead FBU on the comments. Thank you once again for your donation. Says, I bought a Spud t-shirt from Pro Wrestling Tees because his video broke my heart. I'm sure many people did. If it's a work/shoot, WWE have sunk to a new low. I do not know what to think.
I don't disagree with that whatsoever. Thank you very much for your question/comment. It's just that brings into focus to me that people on the back of his highly emotional outpouring have then decided to support him, and then ultimately he could be getting supported, like sort of underhandedly, by his former/current/future employer. So he's earned a double payday. The thing for me about this is that video, god damn it, you just turning yourself heel if I'm not considered one already by the comment section, by daring to question the validity of it and the authenticity of it, because he was so clearly grief-stricken. And because he was grief-stricken, you don't want to take and retrospectively analyze the words he's saying coldly and picking them apart and saying, oh, he said this when he said this. Clearly, he's got onto a phone and just decided to pour his heart out. You cannot, in the cold light of day, blame him for anything he said. But there was a certain, I feel awful saying this, there was a certain kayfabe element to his spiel that kind of sat weirdly with me at the time. He said something to the effect of, these might be the last matches I ever work, and Jesus Christ, they might well be in WWE at least. He also said, if I don't win, that's it for me. And it's like, well, surely you're getting told. Surely you know this already. Why are you trying to put it across the idea that you are in control of this narrative? If you fight hard enough, you will win. This whole thing is a goddamn work. Pro wrestling is predetermined. I don't know if I'm just misconstruing his words, being incredibly harsh, or if there was a certain working instinct within that video all along. Regardless, if it's come from the even cynical place, I don't know whether that's to be praised, to be perfectly honest. I've got a big affection for the 90s politicers of professional wrestling's history. It's just this whole situation makes me feel so uneasy, so conflicted, and regardless of whether his motivations were cynical or just purely emotional and impulsive in that moment, how WWE, who are the real ones to blame here, have handled this, I find absolutely disgusting.
Hanford, before we get your perspective on all this, Lowell Price, thank you for your donation in the comments, says Vince is famous for quiet handshake deals work. Hanford, you're affectionately known here at What Culture as the Wrestling Encyclopedia, and this, to sort of link it to other things, isn't exactly the first time WWE have used real life problems in storylines, is it?
No, but and I hate to bring this up, but the reality they're channeling here reminds me of something that Jim Cornette was very harsh on Vince Russo for in the height of the Attitude Era, which was using things such as like lost children. They did a Terry Runnels miscarriage angle and things like that. I'm not comparing one to the other directly, but what I am saying is, in your escapist entertainment, you don't use like real life tragedy that would be very hurtful to like complete strangers watching your product. They've gone more direct. If you think about the death of Eddie Guerrero and how they monetize that in all the various different ways, there has been various shades of darkness that they've applied to the product before. But this feels different because it feels here as if they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. It feels like they've done the dirty deed in letting go Drake Maverick and countless other colleagues, and then somehow suggesting that if at the end of all this he's on his knees kissing that interim cruiserweight title like he's Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 12, this is somehow a really incredible redemption arc, when it's absolutely not. Because who else watching this that has lost their job, or whose partner has lost their job, who is just generally feeling the strain and the stress of what might happen in their job or their financial futures as a result of all this, who is going to look at that man holding that piece of tin and think, oh, he's a reflection of my own sort of personal problems. He's somebody that now currently speaks to me in my own personal circumstances. Those examples that I mentioned before were similar cases of that. Nobody wants to watch their wrestling to be either reminded or mocked or derided for some awful things that are going on in their life. And that's what all of this is. And like, to defend Sidgwick a little bit, because I understand the kind of like the complex machinations of having a go, not having a go, but like highlighting elements of that promo that may have been worked. We're both probably into the idea that there's a bit of wrestler instinct in him that thinks, how can I try and make hay while the sun's still shining? But that's not on him. That's on WWE for using that. So it's a really tricky one, and not sound like we're kind of having a go at Drake Maverick here, but we're really, really not. However this plays out, he's like at best just one of their pawns, as most of their wrestlers are now.
Hamflet's mentioned a few really valid points there, and I don't really want to compare this situation to some of the other situations, but Michael Sidgwick, is this the lowest WWE has sunk in your eyes?
No, it's not the lowest. It's a company defined by lows in terms of how it conducts business. Really shocking, infamous examples of what John Oliver described as their subterranean morality. That was opposed to the high ground. It was a nice bit of wordplay that captured it perfectly. 1997, Brian Pillman tragically died. There was the argument that if not WWE explicitly, then basically pro wrestling as a racket was incredibly complicit in the deaths of its premature young stars who passed away during that awful number of years. Because of the schedule that it forced the workers to do, for the demands of the physique that they had to look like on television. This is all well covered ground. 24 hours after the death of Brian Pillman, Vince McMahon conducted an interview with his widow in which the strategy essentially was to absolve his company of any wrongdoing. He wanted to get that out of her 24 hours later
And get numbers.
and nip a potential furore in the bud. They are continuing to run shows in Saudi Arabia. The very best thing you can say about which is the fact that they are not overtly carrying out the propaganda that they did on the first show, purely because the kingdom were complicit in the death and dismemberment of a dissident journalist. This company does horrendous things all the time. They did horrendous things 8 days ago, right? They are, as Andy Murray put it on Twitter, let's just get some heat on him at the same time. It's a matter of public record. I'm sure he can't mind at all. He's written it down. They're outdoing themselves daily in the race for most disgusting promotional tactic.
It's a great tweet from Meltzer, wasn't there? It must have been Wednesday night or possibly even Thursday, where it was just like, and you thought Dana and the UFC might be stealing it this year.
Yeah.
Nope. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway after this discussion. Do WWE, having seen the public backlash to all this, change the way they treat their, I want to say employees, but it's, we can't really use that as a catch-all term. I'm trying to talk about not just the releases of wrestling personnel, but writers and producers and what have you. Do you think this registers are all with them that, public perception of this is really bad and we should probably change it?
Nah, they will be themselves then, now, forever. And what evidence have we got to suggest otherwise? Crown Jewel 2018, I suppose, was a landmark moment in that regard, because there was a decision made to push through with that show for the benefit of the remainder of that 10-year deal, which they did. The very recent cases of, say, WrestleMania going ahead, or even the continuance of live tapings, for all that AEW doesn't want to be and shouldn't aspire to be WWE, by being the industry leader, kind of opened the floodgates for AEW to continue on in earnest, because it just made the point that, well, this is wrestling, this is what wrestling does. So WWE behaving badly will allow the industry to continue to do so, while WWE sort of like slides in and amongst the weeds of it all. They'll never respond to any of this. They'll never act on any of this. You mentioned Dana White there and the Fight Island, and Dana White hasn't covered himself in glory in this regard, but that's as much been because he's constantly been a public figure. He's been extremely vocal. He's been that guy stood in the middle of the street saying, open the pubs, or somebody with a sandwich board over themselves in America saying that they want to go to church, or one of those examples, basically. Dana White's been one there out front. Vince McMahon's been a lot more insidious. He's let his decisions do the talking. He's let the actions of Black Wednesday speak for his company ethos. He's let the continuation of live shows and then the changing of his mind and the changing of his talent schedule do the talking where he doesn't particularly need to. When he does have to do the talking, he's going to do it after the stock market closes to his shareholders to try and hide in plain sight from some of the latest things he's managed to get away with. This will always be their MO, and has been for the longest time, unfortunately. Like, history is there for you to see. We go all the way back to the late 80s and the early 90s when the government were like really sort of starting to put their thumb on Vince McMahon's business practices and finding old stolen memos and leaked messages and things like that. This is not to sort of libel us or get anyone into trouble, but like, Vince McMahon is always worth a Google if you're looking for a slightly interesting story. And this is just going to be another one of them. They're happy for that to exist in their history because with enough time and enough whitewashing, they'll just move on to the next thing.
I should point out at this point that our conflicted reaction, in which we are trying to parse what's going on, and then every avenue you go down, you just get an end of, you just don't want to, you just want to go back because it's a kind of a horrible truth that you're confronting. Leo Rush tweeted during the match last night, either way this goes, it's kind of effed up. And I think that is the TLDR version of this podcast from a very credible source, more credible than us, you would expect. So yeah, we're not the only ones conflicted about this whatsoever. There can be no true happy ending to this work shoot storyline because they should not have done this work shoot storyline at all, in my opinion. I mean, the guy gets his job back. Well, hey, I mean, as I pointed out, yes, that would be the most fantastic thing. In fact, it would be even more fantastic if they didn't release any of this talent in the first place, because ultimately, as someone pointed out, it's pretty much the combined dollar amount of what Goldberg made on the last Saudi show.
I'll say this about this specific angle just quickly as well, is that right now we're 24 hours removed from the first use of it on NXT television, 8 days after he was actually released. And there is still a sizable portion of the fans that are just willing to engage with it as a storyline. They're saying, yeah, come on, Drake, you can do this. Smash the system, win this tournament, whatever. This reminds me a lot.
It's fake.
Yeah, this reminds me a lot of people claiming those early weeks of the empty arena shows to be escapist, and thank you WWE for putting on television in these trying times, blah, 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 blah. And look how that has gradually turned as people have read the room and realized what that's come to represent. And I think that will happen more with every passing week with the storyline. I don't know how much is taped. I don't know what's going to be live, but I don't expect WWE to respond to it. They're going to proceed with this angle however they intended to do so, win, lose, or draw for Drake Maverick. And I sense that the reactions will shift further to the elements of disgust with every passing week.
Just to clarify a few things, thanks to everyone who's left a comment in the comment section. Anyone like Balls, who says, didn't Drake Maverick lose already? Yes, he did lose on last night's episode of NXT. This is a round robin tournament, so presumably with 2 victories in his final 2 matches. I can't remember exactly who's in his bracket, but is he Swerve? He's in Swerve and Kira Tozawa's group, I do believe, in fact. With 2 wins in his final 2 matches, he could well make it through to the final, which would then, the winner of that would obviously challenge Jordan Devlin, presumably when they can, for the Cruiserweight Championship. Just to clarify there, Oliver Byrne in the comments says, I have every faith in WWE to sink lower than this. Remembering Crisis, they produce their best work. Comment here. We're going to move on and answer some of your questions in the comment section to try and delve back into this before we finish. Matt Scott, thank you for your donation, says, what do you think of the Hacker being a group? Ali, R-Truth, Xavier Woods, Chad Gable, and maybe some others. People were speculating about Xavier Woods, of course, earlier on this week. Ali seems to be the obvious choice. Hamza, what do you think of that?
Thank you for your donation and your question, and a bit more crack on the glitch, because I missed the days when we could just fantasy book the glitch, and that was the trickiest proposition in wrestling conversation. Ali is still the favourite sentimentally, I think, because all of this feels like it leans in to the rotten look he had last year. If you want to fantasy book this beyond the daft vignettes we've seen of him looking like a 1990s computer hacker with all them old modems and daft dial-up noises, this is a man that was sort of like cheated by the system and tried to get it across repeatedly through like sad tweets that he was cheated by the system. So of course he would use his own system to try and cheat everybody else. It would be quite WWE of them like being aware of people being like ahead of this and seeing that it's Ali and thinking, oh, we're going to make it Xavier Woods, then that'll show him. It sort of reminds me of Matt Hardy turning instead of Christian and leaving Christian for ECW because people knew he was returning. They have done things like that in the past. But I don't know, Ali makes sense. And this isn't a bad storyline. And this is escapist because it's got people talking. It's a little bit silly. And you sense more payoffs are going to come. So I'd quite like it for Ali's sake if it was him.
Yeah, I mean, they should surely learn from. I mean, it's fine to have a, who is it or who done it or whatever storyline and have fans work it out and then that still happen. The whole Kurt Angle's illegitimate son, for as much as it was like, you didn't expect it to be Jason Jordan, made no sense after that. Mr. Phoenix in the comments asks a very important question, actually, which kind of relates to what we're talking about here of WWE's manipulation of some of their wrestlers. Sige, why don't you take this one? When we have crowds again, will the NXT warm bodies that have filled out Raw stay there? Your Lurkins, Birch, Caden, Vink, Thorne, etc. That's very interesting, that, because they've stepped in at a time when WWE clearly need them.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a really good one, actually. Hopefully you'll unblock me on Twitter for answering it. It's strange because once we return steadily to the new normal, if we see any sacred crossover of the sacred brand boundaries, you're going to get people who get pissed off. This doesn't matter. This is one of the actually uglier things I find about this ongoing situation and what we are kind of referring to as the empty arena era. It's happening across both WWE and, yes, AEW. WWE are getting a lot of they're there, so let's make use of them, Performance Center folk to appear on Raw and NXT, even if they weren't sort of on the NXT roster proper before all of this happened. AEW, a lot of the talent they've been using in squash matches are from the Georgia area where that bulk taping was filmed. The kind of grim implication of which was, you're local, you're available, here's an opportunity. By the way, you can't, you have to be extra specially careful if you ever wanted to see your parents ever again, or the next time you go to the supermarket, just know there's a higher chance that someone tests positive because of the chain of social interaction you've been on. But do you want the opportunity that you would never get in front of a crowd because you're not at that level yet? It's all pretty grim. And I would obviously love to see each of the enhancement talents from the local Georgia area on AEW Dynamite and the lower rung Performance Center guys be rewarded with an opportunity. But then this is such a complex moral area. Do I resent them more for being bang up for it? And do I far more respect the Hangman Page, who's been incredibly insistent on just staying the hell home and declaring as such on social media and encouraging everybody else to say the same? At the very least, because of the disparity between NXT and main roster salaries, I would hope someone like Oni Lorcan, for the remainder of these proceedings, gets paid the same amount as someone who appears on Raw, at the very, very least.
Indeed. To talk a little bit more about NXT, Hamflet, Gavin Wilson asks, with Charlotte still on Raw, has the NXT women's title become the women's division's mid-card title?
Well, in terms of like the mid-card on Raw?
I would assume so, the perception, etc.
I don't think so. I think to be honest, with Charlotte appearing on Raw, it's just, I think if anything, that's an indictment of the current state of the division on Raw. She's there in NXT because if you imagine that they planned this out before the empty arena began, they probably saw this as an opportunity to hopefully use her as a bit of a ratings draw on a Wednesday night. They know the prominence of the women's division and the general fan satisfaction with that, and thought, right, how can we instantly create dream matches that we can promote for television every week? Throw Charlotte on there, have her be a version of her father, the touring world champion, that's going to draw the house, except every Wednesday night she draws a number. You're going to put her against Mia Yim one week, you're going to put her against Io Shirai the next week, you're going to put her against Candice LeRae, and so on and so on and so on. There are a raft of opponents she can face on NXT. It's almost as if that's the role that she's got, and the Raw thing is just a bit of an inconvenience. She'll stay on Raw because she's a Raw superstar, but she'll draw the ratings on Wednesday night for NXT. They just want the best of both worlds with probably arguably their best all-rounder.
Before we finally bring it back to a sort of summary of this Drake Maverick issue, I want to give you Oliver Burns' question. Thank you, Oliver, for this. Oliver says, I was wrongly annoyed at WWE wrestlers on Twitter for not speaking up about the sackings, but do you think those with more power should have spoken out, Michael Sidgwick?
I think it's ultimately up to the individual to deal with how it all went down, because ultimately I will never place individual blame on a person fired by a corporation on the scale of WWE. Ultimately, there's more than a few of the released talents who might not get the most high-paying jobs anywhere. For example, New Japan Pro Wrestling, they pay as well as anybody, not any company that is not named WWE out there, and yet they have a very specific demand for how good a pro wrestler is technically, which kind of disqualifies quite a few people. AEW, you won't expect they're going to do any mass recruitment anytime soon. It's not financially viable. Ring of Honor, I suspect, will be more open. But they're not running shows, so they're not going to be signing anybody else soon. Ultimately, what I'm trying to get at is that a lot of these released WWE talents are, in their heart of hearts, you expect, kind of hoping that they will be allowed to return, or they can work their way into a return once all of this passes by. So I understand the frustration. I feel it personally as well, but I wouldn't personally put it on the talent to fight that battle for themselves, if that makes sense, because all they're realistically doing is potentially jeopardizing their future career opportunities. It sucks. It's frustrating. If any target requires a massive, massive, massive tirade, it is WWE, but just leave it to the literal neckbeards like us who can collectively form a narrative that deservedly buries them, and let's keep the talent job safe for the time being, unless they are spectacular banter on podcasts on Talk Is Jericho, because that's obviously absolutely fine.
As we bring this to a close then, Michael Hamflet, we talked a little bit about the moment where maybe the opinion of how WWE utilizing Drake Maverick changed from maybe shoot to work or work shoot or whatever you want to call it. For you, what was that kind of tipping point? Because there's people who said that they thought it was dodgy that Drake Maverick referenced the fact he was still going to have matches in this tournament, more so than necessarily just on NXT, talking about this being his last opportunity, really. But then that could have just been hubris in the moment or whatever. Then there was obviously the way that WWE have teased this. There's been tweets by Drake Maverick imploring people to watch NXT. There was obviously the way it was used last night. And there was Drake Maverick's appearance on The Bump, which Darren McGuire in the comments references saying, did no one see his interview on The Bump? It's a work. What was the catalyst for you?
Well, it was probably yesterday when the bump clips were there, when the tweet was there, and then enhanced horribly so by what we saw on NXT. And that's because, to sort of pile on with what Sidgwick said there, you want to look out for the best interests of the wrestlers first and foremost. And I'll go a long way to giving wrestlers benefit of the doubt over and over and over and over again, because they're the ones that are dropping themselves on the back for my entertainment every single night. So they get like a lot of rope, and Drake Maverick will continue to get plenty. But yeah, the whole scene started to feel grimmer from yesterday onwards as we drove towards. We talked on the NXT and AEW preview about AEW almost like desperately promoting Dustin Rhodes. He might lose to Kip Sabian, and that'll be a retirement. That was a bit like, that's a bit of a grabby ratings grabbing sort of move, a bit unnecessary. That is dwarfed by the prospect of them either holding a weapon behind Drake Maverick's back and telling people to watch NXT, or get on the bump so we can film you, so we can just drive home how emotional you are about this whole scene. Like, you can kick that into a cocked hat, because that's far, far worse. Pretty much when there was even the sniff of this being a pro wrestling angle, like, it stunk.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I just want to reiterate, just to make it perfectly crystal clear, I do not blame Drake Maverick whatsoever, regardless of how much of a collaboration this might be and how early this collaboration might have happened. Because at the end of the day, the man's got to make a living, and there's kind of only two places to do it right now, because only two places, AEW and WWE, are wrong-headed enough to actually run shows. So if he's put himself in that situation, or if he's been placed in that situation, I mean, it's ugly, but he's not going to earn any money realistically. So fair dues to him. It's desperate times.
Yes, and just to sort of reiterate as well, we're not attempting to make light of any of the other WWE releases, just purely how WWE appear to have manipulated this into some sort of storyline. But intrigued to know your thoughts in the comment section or on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE about how you think WWE have handled this, whether or not you think it was a work initially, whether it's become a work, whether it's just completely a shoot and they are, just running out the clock on Drake Maverick's contract and getting matches out of him whilst he still has to compete for them. Do let us know, and we'll no doubt deal with this going forward as more details come out. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. As I said, let us know your thoughts in the comments section or on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. Watch, they can follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflet at
Michael Hamflet.
Follow Michael Sidgwick at
Thank you all very much for your donations and questions. You can follow me at M Sidgwick.
Follow me at Adam Wilborn. Make sure you subscribe to What Culture Wrestling for daily wrestling podcasts, of course. And make sure you join us 4 p.m. tomorrow. We will be in a roundabout sort of way previewing tomorrow night's episode, indeed, of SmackDown, but also dealing with any breaking news stories and any more developments with this, I suppose. As I said, 4 p.m. right here on What Culture Wrestling's YouTube channel. But for now, this has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dadley Boys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all your donations. Thank you for all your questions. And we will see you soon.